The senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, first of all, let me express my gratitude to colleagues and others who've come to the floor of the chamber at this moment. There are two moments, I guess, in every public servant's life in serving in the Congress, which you recall: your maiden speech that you give when you first arrive to the Senate or shortly thereafter, and then, of course, any closing remarks you may have. I can't recall what my maiden speech was even about 36 years ago in the House of Representatives, except that I do recall very vividly that there was no one else in the chamber when I gave it. It was an empty hall early one evening, except for one colleague, Johnny Dent. For those who are old enough to remember, Johnny Dent from Pennsylvania was sitting in the chair. He wore dark glasses forever. He always wore dark glasses, even all during the day. And he sat there patiently and listened to me as I gave my knee-rattling, hand-shaking maiden speech in the House of Representatives. Midway through the speech, he walked up to me, as those who envision the chamber of the House speaking from the well, and walked up to me and said quietly into this ear, "You know, kid, it's not on the level," to me. So that was my maiden speech in the Senate. So I'm deeply honored that a number of you have come out today. So I'm not speaking to an empty chamber. In some closing remarks I have about my service in this remarkable chamber. Well, for more than 200 years, a uniquely American story has unfolded here in the chamber of the United States Senate. A fascinating, inspiring, often tumultuous tale of conflict and compromise, reflecting the awesome potential of our still young democracy and its occasional moments of agonizing frustration. For much of my life, this story has intersected with my own in ways that have been both thrilling and humbling. As a 14-year-old boy, I sat in the family gallery right here in this chamber, watching my father as he took the oath of office as a new senator. A few years later, in 1962, I sat where these young men and women sit today, serving as a page, a Senate page. John F. Kennedy was president. Lyndon Johnson presided over this body. 18 years later, in the fall of 1980, the people of Connecticut gave me the honor of a lifetime when they asked me to give voice to their views, electing me to serve as their United States Senator. For the past 30 years, I've worked to sustain that trust. I'm proud of the work that I've done, but it's time for my story and that of this institution, which I cherish so much, to diverge. Thus, Mr. President, I rise to give some valedictory remarks as my service as a United States Senator from Connecticut comes to a close. Now, it is common for retiring senators to say the following: "I'll miss the people, but not the work." Mr. President, you won't hear that from me. Most assuredly, I will miss the people of the United States Senate. But I will miss the work as well. Over the years, I've both witnessed and participated in some great debates in this chamber, moments when statesmen of both parties gathered together in this hall to weigh the great questions of our time. And while I wish there had been more of those moments, I will always remember the Senate debates on issues such as Central America, the Iraq War, campaign finance reform, securities litigation, health care, and of course financial reform in this Congress. But when I'm home in Connecticut, I see the results as well of the work that we did every day. I see workers coming home from their shifts at a Pratt & Whitney jet engine plant, electric boat division, the Sikorsky helicopter plant, the lifeblood of a defense manufacturing sector so critical to our national security and to the economic well-being of my home state. I see communities preparing for high-speed rail and breaking ground for new community health centers. I see the grants that we fought for helping cities and towns to achieve sustainable communities and to promote economic development. When I'm home, I meet parents who, because of the Family and Medical Leave Act, don't have to choose between keeping their jobs and taking care of their sick children. Visit with elderly folks who will no longer have to choose between paying for their prescription drugs and paying for their heat. And I hear from consumers who have been victimized by unfair practices on the part of credit card companies and who will no longer be subject to those abuses. And I meet young children as well, through early Head Start or access to after-school programs, who have blossomed academically in spite of difficult economic circumstances. As proud as I am of the work that has made these stories possible over the last 3 decades, I'm keenly aware, particularly today, that I did not do any of this alone. Until this last Congress, with rare exceptions, every major piece of legislation that I authored that became law, including the ones I've just mentioned, had a Republican co-sponsor, as well as support from my Democratic caucus. So to my Democratic and Republican Senate colleagues who joined me in all of these efforts over 30 years, I say thank you this afternoon. I also want to thank, if I can, the unsung heroes of this institution, the Senate staff, my personal staff. It would be a grievous understatement to simply say that they make the trains run on time. Without them, as all of us know, the trains, of course, would never leave the station at all. The floor staff, the cloakroom professionals of both parties, and the hundreds of unknown and unseen people who show up every day in this body to make this critical institution of democracy function. Without them, no senator could fulfill his or her obligations to the American people. Many of my personal staff and committee staff are present in the Senate gallery today, and neither I nor the millions of Americans whose lives they've enriched or whose burdens they have lightened can ever thank you enough. I only hope that your time with me has been as fulfilling as my time with you. Of course, I owe an enormous debt of gratitude to the people of Connecticut, whose confidence, patience, and spirit has given my life and its work deep meaning. As rich as our common language is, words cannot even come close to capturing the depth of my affection for and the appreciation of the people of the state of Connecticut. For almost 4 decades, 3 terms in the House of Representatives, 5 terms in this chamber, you've entrusted me to labor on your behalf, and I deeply thank you for that honor. And lastly, my family. My parents are long since deceased, but their guidance, inspiration, and example have never departed. For the last 30 years, I've sat at this very same desk, occupied by my father during the 12 years that he served in this chamber. His courage, character, and conviction have been a constant reminder of what it means to be a United States Senator. I want to thank my siblings and their children, other relatives for their enthusiastic support, particularly during the rough patches. From time to time, we all need the safe harbor of family at the darker moments. And to Jackie, Grace, and Christina, who supported and inspired me every day, you mean more to me than I could ever say in these few short moments. So come January, I'm glad I'll have more time to say it to you more often. And to Jackie in particular, you've been my anchor to windward in the rough and turbulent waters of public service. When it was the darkest, you were the brightest. So to you and to my young ladies, I love you more than life. As this chapter of my career comes to a close, a new chapter in the Senate's history is beginning. When this body is gaveled to order in January, nearly half of its members will be in their first term. And even though I could spend hours fondly recalling a lifetime of yesterdays, this new Senate and the nation must confront a very uncertain tomorrow. So rather than recite a long list of personal memories or to revisit video highlights of my Senate service, I'd like to take these brief time and this few short moments to offer a few thoughts to those who will write the Senate's next chapter. I'll begin by stating the sadly obvious. Our electoral system is a mess. Powerful financial interests free to throw money, along with their little transparency, have corrupted, in my view, the basic principles underlying our representative democracy. And as a result, our political system at the federal level is completely dysfunctional. Those who were elected to the Senate just a few weeks ago must already begin the unpleasant work of raising money for their re-election 6 years hence. Newly elected senators will learn that their every legislative maneuver, their every public utterance, and even some of their private deliberations will be fodder of a 24/7 political media industry that seems to favor speculation over analysis and conflict over consensus. This explosion of new media brings with it its own benefits and its drawbacks, and it is occurring simultaneously as the presence of traditional media outlets in our nation are declining. So while the corridors of Congress are crowded with handheld video and cell phone cameras, there's a declining role, unfortunately, for newspapers, radio, and network journalists reporting the routine deliberations that take place in our subcommittee hearings. Case in point, 10 years ago, 11 or 12 reporters from Connecticut covered our delegation's legislative activities. Today, there's only one doing the same work. Meanwhile, intense partisan polarization has raised the stakes in every debate and on every vote, making it difficult to lose with grace or nearly impossible to compromise without cost. Americans' distrust of politicians provides compelling incentives for senators to distrust each other, to disparage this very institution, and disengage from the policy-making process. These changes have already had their effect on the Senate. The purpose of insulating one half of our national legislature from the volatile shifts in public mood has been degraded. And while I strongly favor reforming our campaign finance system, revitalizing and rehabilitating our journalistic traditions, and restoring citizen faith in government and politics, I know that wishes won't make it so. Now, I've heard some people suggest that the Senate, as we know it, simply cannot function in such a highly charged political environment, that we should change Senate rules to make it more efficient, more responsive to the public mood, more like the House of Representatives, where the majority can essentially bend the minority to its will. I appreciate the frustrations that many have with the slow pace of the legislative process, and I certainly share some of my colleagues' anger even with the repetitive use and abuse of the filibuster. Thus, I can understand the temptation to change the rules that make the Senate so unique and simultaneously so terribly frustrating. But whether such temptation is motivated by a noble desire to speed up the legislative process or by pure political expediency, I believe such changes would be unwise. When 100 senators are but temporary stewards of a unique American institution founded upon universal principles. The Senate was designed to be different, not simply for the sake of variety, but because the framers believed the Senate could and should be the venue in which statesmen would lift America up to meet its unique challenges. As a senator from the state of Connecticut, and the longest serving one in its history, I take special pride in the role of two Connecticut Yankees in the establishment of this very body. It was Roger Sherman and Oliver Ellsworth, delegates from Connecticut to the Constitutional Convention in 1787, who proposed the idea of a bicameral national legislature. The Connecticut Compromise, as it came to be known, was designed to ensure that no matter which way the political winds blew or how hard the gusts, there would be a place, one place, for every voice to be heard. The history of this young democracy, the framers decided, should not be written solely in the hand of the political majority. In a nation founded in revolution against tyrannical rule, which sought to crush dissent, by the way, there should be one institution that would always provide a space where dissent was valued and respected. E pluribus unum, out of many one. And though we would act as one, and should, the framers believed that our political debate should always reflect that in our beliefs and in our aspirations, we are, in fact, many. In short, our founders were concerned not only with what we legislated, but just as importantly, with how we legislated. Now, in my years here, I've learned that the appreciation of the Senate's role in our national debate is an acquired taste. Therefore, to my fellow senators who have never served a day in the minority, I urge you to pause in your enthusiasm to change Senate rules. And to those in the minority who routinely abuse the rules of the Senate to delay or defeat almost any Senate decision, know that you'll be equally responsible for undermining the unique value of the United States Senate, a value, I would argue, greater than that which you might assign to the political motivations driving your obstruction. And so, but in the end, of course, I would suggest this isn't about the filibuster. What will determine whether this institution works or not, what has always determined whether we will fulfill the framers' highest hopes or justify the cynics' worst fears, is not the Senate rules or the calendar or the media. It is whether each of the 100 senators can work together, living up to the incredible honor that comes with the title and the awesome responsibility that comes with this office. Politics today seemingly rewards only passion and independence, not deliberation and compromise as well. It has become commonplace to hear candidates with this body campaign on how they're going to Washington to shake things up all by themselves. May I politely suggest that you're seeking election to the wrong office. The United States Senate does not work that way, nor can it or should it. Mayors, governors, presidents can sometimes succeed by the sheer will or force of their will. But there's never been a senator so persuasive, so charismatic, so clever, or so brilliant that they could make a significant difference while refusing to work with other members of this body. Simply put, Mr. President, senators cannot ultimately be effective alone. As I noted earlier, until last year's health care bill, there had not been a single piece of legislation that I've ever passed without a Republican partner. Of course, none of these victories came easily. The notion that partisan politics is a new phenomenon, or that partisan politics serve no useful purpose, is just flat wrong. From the moment of our founding, America has been engaged in an eternal and often pitched partisan debate. That's not weakness. In fact, it is at the core of our strength as a democracy and our success as a nation. Political bipartisanship is a goal, not a process. You don't begin the debate with bipartisanship, you arrive there. And you can only do so when determined partisans create consensus and thus bipartisanship. In the end, the difference between a partisan brawl and a passionate but ultimately productive debate rests on the personal relationships between those of us who serve here. A legislative body that operates on unanimous consent as we do cannot function unless the members of this body trust each other implicitly. There's no hope of building that trust unless there's a will to treat each other with respect and civility, and to invest the time it takes to create that trust and to strengthen those personal bonds. No matter how obnoxious you find a colleague's rhetoric or how odious you believe or find their beliefs, you need them. And despite what some insist, you do no injustice to your ideological principles when you seek out common ground. You do no injustice to your political beliefs when you take the time to get to know those who don't share them. I've served with several hundred senators under every partisan configuration imaginable. Republican presidents, Democratic presidents, divided government, one-party rule. And as odd as it may sound in the present political environment, in the last 3 decades that I've served here, I cannot recall a single Senate colleague, Democrat or Republican, with whom I could not work. Sometimes those relationships took time, but then that is the way and why the framers gave us 6-year terms, so that members could build the social capital necessary to make this body function. Under our Constitution, each of us are given a 6-year term, but only each member can decide how to use those years. And as one senator who has witnessed what is possible here, I urge each of my colleagues, take the time to use those years well. And I pledge to those of you who have recently arrived, your tenure here will be so much more rewarding. More importantly, you'll be vindicating the confidence that the framers placed in each person who takes the oath of office as a United States Senator, upholding a trust that echoes throughout the centuries. I share the confidence that Roger Sherman, Oliver Ellsworth, and the framers placed in this body and in its members. But I'm not blind. I know the Senate today, in the view of many, is not functioning as well as it can or should. I urge you to look around you, however. This moment is difficult, not only for this body, but for our nation it serves. And in the end, what matters most in America is not only what happens within the walls of this chamber, but rather the consequences of our decisions across the nation and around the world. Our economy is struggling, as all of us know. Many of our people are experiencing real hardship in our country. The obvious unemployment, home foreclosures, endangered pensions are the obvious problems people are facing. Meanwhile, we face challenges of a mounting debt, energy, immigration, nuclear proliferation, ongoing conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, and so much more. All of these challenges make the internal and procedural conflicts we face as senators somehow small and petty. History calls us, each of us who serve here, to lift our eyes above the fleeting controversies of the moment and to refocus our attention on our common challenge and common purpose. By regaining its footing, this institution, the Senate, can help this nation to regain its confidence and to restore that essential sense of optimism. We must regain that focus, and most importantly, we need our confidence back. We need to feel that same optimism that has sustained our nation for more than 2 centuries. Now, I'm not naive. I'm aware of the conventional wisdom that predicts gridlock in Congress. But I know both of these leaders, Democratic and Republican leaders, and I know the sitting members of this chamber well. And my confidence is not unshaken. Why? Because we've been there before. This is not new. The country has recovered in the past from economic turmoil. We've come together to heal deep divides in our nation. And the Senate has led by finding its way through seemingly intractable political divisions. We have proven time and time again that the Senate is capable of meeting that test of history. We've evidenced the wisdom of the framers who created its unique rules and set the high standards that we must meet. After all, no other legislative body grants so much power to each member, nor does any other legislative body ask so much of each member. Just as the Senate's rules empower each member to act like a statesman, they also require statesmanship from each of us. But these rules are merely requiring from us the kind of leadership that our constituents need from us, that history calls on us to provide in difficult times such as the ones we're encountering. Maturity in a time of pettiness, calm in a time of anger, and leadership in a time of uncertainty. That is what the nation asks of the United States Senate, and that is what this office demands of each who serve here. Over the past 2 centuries, some 1,900 men and women have shared the privilege of serving in this body. Each of us has been granted but a temporary, fleeting moment in which to indulge either our political ambition and ideological agenda, or alternatively, to rise to the challenge and make a constructive mark on our nation's history. My moment is now at an end. But to those whose moments are not yet over, and to those whose moments will soon begin, I wish you much more than good fortune. I wish you wisdom. I wish you courage. I wish for each of you that one day, when you reflect back on your moment, that you will know that you have lived up to the tremendous honor, the daunting responsibility of being a United States Senator. To quote St. Paul, the time of my departure has come. I fought the good fight. I finished the race. I've kept the faith. And so, Mr. President, it is with great pride and deep humility and incredible gratitude to all of you here today, as a United States Senator, that I yield the floor. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. Bless you, Christina.
Thank you.